Room 312, borrowed perfume. I was the one who printed the reservation. That's how the world likes to play with me. Hands me the receipt, initials it, and then waits while I add up the numbers late. Tuesday nights at the Harbor Light are slow enough to notice who comes through the revolving door twice. Business travelers with square shoulders and rolling suitcases. Visiting relatives who smell like airport coffee. And then at 8:41 p.m., a woman in a slate trench coat with my wife's perfume stamped on the air like a signature. Not my wife, someone an inch shorter, hair darker, but the scent was exact, amber and pepper and a sweetness that shows up late, like an apology. I'd bought that bottle for Hannah on our second anniversary because she said a woman becomes a room the moment she enters it. I kept my eyes on the screen, but my skin turned to tuning forks. "Check in for Eve," the woman said softly, sliding her card across. Not Hannah's name, not even close. "Last name?" I asked, because I still wore the night manager's tie and a version of integrity. "Leroux," she smiled, and the room almost agreed with her. "A friend made the booking." I typed, and there it was. A non-refundable suite one night, paid by a card that belonged to no one I knew but felt like the sort of name you invent if you wanted to pass through city lights without being counted. I knew the algorithm behind our fraud checks better than the back of my hand. This passed. Room 312. King bed, corner window, a view of the river pretending to be permanent. "Will anyone be joining you?" I heard myself ask. A stupid question, a nervous one. My hands were steady because they've been taught. "Eventually," she said, as if she'd been asked for the weather, not her plotline. "Is there a bar?" I pointed. She thanked me. I handed her the key sleeve with the Harbor Light's clean blue logo and let the elevator swallow her. The perfume stayed, shy but certain. I stood very still until my night auditor, Tomas, leaned over the counter with a cup of tea and said, "You look like you just remembered a thing you forgot to forget." "Do you ever notice scents that don't belong?" I asked. He sniffed theatrically. "Chlorine, lemon, broken promises, usual cocktail." At 9:06, the revolving door curved again. This time it was him. Daniel, in a suit I recognized because I had complimented it 2 months earlier at a charity thing, because I am the sort of man who notices the way seams are honest or not. Daniel, my friend from pickup basketball, consultant, glib with menus and uncomfortable truths, strode to the desk with a smile he must have proved in mirrors. "Hey, Evan," he said, because of course we live in a world where names refuse to be discreet. "I think a friend checked me in." He didn't say which friend. He didn't have to. I looked at him, and in the same second I watched the elevator numbers blossom and fade. 2, 3, hold. I wanted to ask him why my wife's perfume rode the train before him. I wanted to ask him how long I had been rehearsing his entrance without knowing. Instead, I confirmed the room, handed him the second key, and practiced a smile that belonged to customer service and no one else. "Enjoy your stay," I said. He winked, he actually winked. "Always do." He turned, and in that pivot the world edged a centimeter closer to something I had been refusing to name. It wasn't just jealousy, or rage, or the hot sting you get when a paper cut finds lemon juice. It was a kind of gravity reassigning itself. I closed my eyes long enough to count to 7. I told Tomas I needed a 10-minute walk and stepped into the night. Harbor Light sits across from the river walk, where yachts practice humility and couples practice the art of leaning. The air was cold enough to keep me honest. I had a key to every door in that building. I had access to cameras that remembered what people forgot. I had never used any of it for anything but finding a lost earring or confirming a checkout time. But there are evenings when the word never begins to cough. I could have called Hannah. "Are you out with Emily?" I would ask light like a man flicking lint from a lapel. "How's the wine?" And she would have said, "Good," because that's the polite word for decisions you intend to keep. Or she would have said, "I'll call you tomorrow," which is the same thing dressed in comfort. Instead, I went back inside and did what I always do. I took care of strangers to avoid becoming one. At 10:30, the bar began to thin. At 11:00, our security guard, Mina, did her rounds. At 11:18, the elevator split open and the woman in the slate trench coat came out, hair loosened, face arranged into that unbothered calm people wear when they've made a choice loud enough to muffle the world. She approached the desk with an apologetic shrug. "I hope this isn't a problem," she said, voice almost whisper-like. "Do you have a sewing kit? A button on my coat?" I handed her the kit and a smile I didn't owe and watched her fingers, quick and precise, thread a needle with the ease of someone who had fixed enough small things to avoid the large ones. That's when I saw it, the ring. Not a wedding band, but close. An antique signet worn like a promise to herself. Hannah didn't wear rings except the one we had chosen together. A warm, simple gold we made a ritual of slipping off before cooking. "Thanks," she said, finishing, and then, because she wasn't cruel, added, "Are you okay?" "What makes you ask?" "You're carefully still," she said, and for a second her dark gaze held mine, clinical and kind. "Most people are." I could have told her the whole architecture, how my wife had become a subtler ghost, how her phone now slept under her thigh on the couch, how I had started listening for how loudly a door closed rather than whether it closed at all. Instead, I said, "Long shift," and watched her carry her perfume and secrets back to the elevator. At midnight, the decision made itself. I told Tomas to watch the desk, took the service stairs to the third floor, and walked the carpet like a penitent with good shoes. Room 312 glowed at the edges. Behind it, voices faint, a murmur of laughter you can only produce when you believe the door is loyal. My stomach tightened with a stupid, adolescent hurt, the kind that insists betrayal should have the decency to be whisperless. I swiped my master key into the panel. It blinked red. Our suites were dead-bolted from the inside after 10, a safety feature I had praised in staff meetings. I stood there with a key that had declared its boundaries and a head full of storms. If this were a movie, I would have pounded on the door, demanded names, delivered a one-liner that internet strangers would turn into a meme. But real life is a quieter thing. It's a man standing still in a hallway that smells like eucalyptus, figuring out whether he will be a participant or a witness. I managed to be neither. A door down the hall opened, and a woman stepped out, small, elegant in black, hair pinned up with the same inattentive finesse people give to tying a robe. She looked at me with a clarity that embarrassed the air and said, "You don't want to do that." "I know," I said, "because sometimes there's relief in meeting someone already inside your sentence." "I'm Lena," she said. "Wife of Daniel. I'm sorry, that's not fair. Soon-to-be ex-wife of Daniel." We stared at each other for a heartbeat that could have been a season. "Evan," I said. "Husband of Hannah." The words were uncomfortable in my mouth, as if the vowels had been given away in a trade I didn't remember making. "I figured," she said, "you have that look." "What look is that?" "The look of a man who still does laundry for two." Something like a laugh escaped me, ridiculous on a carpet this expensive. I leaned against the wall. "How did you know?" "I followed his scent," she said, and smiled in a way that included 1,000 small victories and one stubborn loss. "And because he's been sloppy. He learned to be careful with lies and careless with truth. People are like that." She stood next to me, not close enough to be called a comfort, but close enough to redirect my breathing. "Come on," she said. You can watch your disaster from somewhere that doesn't end with a police report. We went to the end of the corridor where the ice machine hummed like a tired lullaby. There's a narrow window there, a slice of city that pretends to be a confession booth. Lena pressed her palm to the glass, as if to anchor herself to something that wouldn't pretend to love her back. The city lights did their unhelpful glittering. In the pause, I could hear through the thick door of 312 a sentence delivered and a laugh interrupting it. It didn't matter which word had belonged to whom. "Did you know?" I asked Lena, because conversation is sometimes a handrail before tonight. "I knew the shape," she said. "I didn't know the address." She turned, leaned her shoulder to the wall, and studied me. "You." "The scent in the lobby," I said, and she nodded like a surgeon hearing symptoms. "Perfume," she said softly. "It gets on everything but the truth." We stood in it a while, silence, the kind you share with a stranger because the alternative is a scream. When she shivered, unnoticed until then, I took off my suit jacket and offered it with instincts older than my hurt. She slipped into it without ceremony. It hung loose and present, like the beginning of a story neither of us had agreed to tell. "This will sound unromantic," Lena said after a time, "but would you like a drink?" "There's a staff kitchen 2 floors down," I said, grateful to be handed a task, any task. "We can at least pretend it's civilized." We went down the service stairs, the kind that see luggage with wheels and hearts with nowhere to go. The kitchen is a fluorescent oasis with steel counters and a refrigerator that size. I poured 2 plastic cups of house red that tastes better at 2 a.m. than at noon. Lena curled onto a stool and tucked her feet under her like a teenager hiding a cigarette. "What will you do?" she asked. "Lie still until morning," I said. "Then ask for what? An explanation, a reason, the right adjective." "I always thought there would be a single sentence that would make all of this balance," she said. "But I think the balancing is a quiet verb you repeat, like breathe." She sipped, made a face, and smiled. "This tastes like rehearsal." "I tell myself the same thing about my life," I said, and the words didn't sting as much as I expected. I told myself we were just between chapters. "And maybe you were," she said, "but perhaps they started writing a different book." "Are you always this calm?" I asked. "No," she said without pride. "I cried in the elevator, but I've spent a year making my muscles remember that being steady is not the same as being numb. Also," she raised her cup, "I am a little drunk." We laughed, but softly, because a kitchen like that isn't built for drama. Then something happened I wouldn't write if I were trying to be less human. The room grew smaller. Not physical size, rooms are stubborn about that, but a closeness that happens when people share a story without offering each other the solution. Lena set her cup down. I watched the way her mouth held the aftertaste of wine like a secret, and I felt the pull I'd been ignoring since the lobby. Not just attraction, though yes, that, but a desire to be seen without being edited. "This is probably a bad idea," I said, which was ironic, given that a worse idea had unfolded 3 floors above us. She leaned across the narrow steel table, slow enough that I could watch doubt and hunger take turns. "Maybe the idea is to be gentle," she whispered, and the gentleness entered the room, ready to work. When our mouths met, it was not fireworks, it was a tide, careful and sure. She kissed like someone who intended to remember this without hatting herself later. I answered with the same vow. Her hand found my wrist, my pulse thought it was a drum, and the heat that built was the kind you can talk about where children might be listening. Skin, breath, the geography of a shoulder through fabric. We didn't take off anything. We didn't need to. The thrill was in the restraint, the knowledge that bodies can say yes to a moment without saying yes to the ruin it might request next. We stopped because you must. She pressed her forehead to mine and smiled in that rueful way that belongs to people who have found the edge and chosen not to jump for once. Thank you, she said softly, as if I'd returned a lost thing. For what? For not making it worse in order to feel better. We sat together on the cold floor for a while, backs against the cabinet, hands not quite touching. Somewhere above us, someone poured champagne over a lie. Somewhere below us, the night clerk printed invoices. The world kept its job. At 3:17 we parted. I walked Lena to the corridor. She went back to her room and closed the door like a promise to herself. I stood outside 312 again, but now the pull was gone. I did not knock. I returned to the front desk and relieved Tomas, who yawned in a way that made him look like a kid who'd stolen cake. "How's the world?" he asked. "Fully booked and not nearly full," I said. Hannah came home at noon the next day with that tired glow people borrow from morning afters. She told me about Emily and the wine and the new tapas place with chairs that don't deserve their price, and I let her talk until her mouth ran out of choreography. "I saw Daniel," I said. She paused, even the refrigerator seemed to pause. "Where?" "At the hotel," I said, "with a woman wearing your perfume." She closed her eyes the way you do under sudden light. "Evan," she said, my name full of years. "I'm sorry." "For which part?" I asked, but not like a weapon, more like a man collecting mail. "For starting something without ending what we started first." We talked. It is always boring from the outside, the way two people dismantle a house they built together. She said she had been lonely and I had been busy, and both were true and neither was sufficient. I told her I had kissed someone and she flinched because fairness never arrives on time. We separated in a way we'd be willing to describe to our parents. Boxes, keys, documents with signatures that looked like flags lowering. The ring left a warm circle on my finger for a week, like a reminder that even absence takes up space. 2 months later, Lena texted a picture of the river at dusk, the water pretending to keep secrets. "I'm nearby," she wrote. "Do you still guard the lobby?" "Every night," I typed, and sent her a picture of 2 cups of tea, side by side unclaimed. We met at the bar, not as conspirators this time, but as people who had learned to sit in their own chairs. She wore a different perfume, lighter green like the edge of a season. We talked about anything but the rooms above us. When I walked her to the revolving door, she took my hand in the way that says, "Let's not audition for a tragedy." Outside, the wind was practicing spring. She leaned up and kissed my cheek, 1 square inch of skin that knew the difference between comfort and complicity. "Come find me when you're not counting elevators," she said. "I think we might like each other in daylight." "I already do," I said, and it felt like truth dressed for work. That night, room 312 booked under an actual married couple celebrating a 10th anniversary. They asked for more ice, fewer pillows, late checkout. I watched them kiss in the lobby with the careless certainty of people who had either earned it or were clever enough to borrow it like faith. I hoped for them. I hoped for me. For Hannah, too, in whatever room she chose. Sometimes I still catch the memory of that amber pepper sweetness the second the doors part, and for a breath I am back in that corridor, key blinking red, learning that love isn't always the door that opens. Sometimes it's the hand you don't take. Sometimes it's the kiss you keep where the light can see. And sometimes it's a name on a reservation you don't speak aloud, because you've decided you'd rather check in under your own.